Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to episode 5050 of Industry Insights from Veeam. Jason, how are you today on this lovely Monday?
Every Monday at Veeam is a good Monday, right? 50. We've done 50 of these. That is so cool.
It's kind of amazing, yeah, to think about how it started, how it started and how's it going now? Well, it's going pretty good now, actually. So very grateful for that. And when we do say, wherever you're tuning in from, we do mean it. Please give a shout out in the comments, put a little blurb in there where you're tuning in from, even if it's after this live telecast. I'm in Colorado. Jason's in Texas. Our producer's in Georgia. And we also have production assistants you can see there in Europe as well. Hope to light up a little bit more of this. But Jason, this is part 2 of a 3-part series, and multiple part series are a bit of a theme this year because we have been doing an enormous amount of research. What are we going to double click on today?
So I'm really excited about sharing this 3-part series with folks. A lot of the research that we've done. So last year, one of the benefits, if there were any, of the lockdown is it really allowed us to double down on making sure we knew where the industry was headed. And so we did, 5,000 some odd respondents over multiple surveys. But almost all of our survey work is almost always done around commercial, meaning 250 to 999 employees, or enterprises, meaning 1,000 employees and up. And we really wanted to kind of double click down a layer and look at what's going on in mid-sized organizations. So we contracted a third-party analyst firm, as we always do. They didn't know it was Veeam that was sponsoring this survey work, and they surveyed from 50 to 250 employees to really look at that small and mid-sized business segment. And so this is part 2 of that series. In part 1, we kind of looked at what were the macro trends. What is it that mid-sized organizations are concerned about and what's driving their considerations of change. This week, we're going to kind of double click into what does change look like for them, and what is that momentum? And then a little bit of a spoiler alert. Next week, we're going to look at the role of the partner as part of mid-sized business. And I'm really excited about that too. I've been in data protection for 31 years, and my first 2 jobs when I started in this industry was I was a reseller. I was a field SC at a reseller, and you went out to these, doctors' offices and accounting firms and these small offices, and they didn't have IT. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I was their IT guy, and I put in their servers and I sold them their licenses and I fixed their problems. Right. That is the role of the VAR 31 years ago. And you know what? Not a whole lot has changed. They are still that value-added extension and expertise that so many mid-sized companies rely on. So we're going to double-click on that next week. But for now, let's look at what they got. Let's look at where they're going. I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, perfect tee-up. And if we hit our first slide, a lot of data points coming on here. We'll parse them out for you. Appreciate that when we dropped this in, some of the text, or actually when I enlarged the font, some of the text scrolled off the percentage. So we can read that out for you. Jason, let me hit the punchline on this. If we go around, I'll just go clockwise, meaning you can see the 1%. I've had my backup application 4 years or more. 6 months or less, the smallest amount now, it's 0. That's actually a 14% that have had their backup application between 7 and 12 months.
Yep.
39% that you can see on the screen there, 13 months to 18 months. And then that other, I'll call it roughly 7 o'clock-ish, it says 19, 24 months. That is 27%. Quick add on the HP calculator, exactly 80.00% of the respondents have had their backup application in production usage 2 years or less.
Yeah, so let's look at that. And by the way, for those folks that want to get a copy of this particular slide, the numbers that are slightly cut off on the pie chart are actually also on the very bottom of the right-hand side as well. So one of the fun parts about this particular survey, so we've surveyed 400 folks, 200 in the US, 200 across 4 different countries in Europe. And so you can kind of see the breakdown between the US mid-sized organizations and the European mid-sized organizations on that right-hand side, and then the summaries of those averages are actually in that lower piece. I think there's a couple things really interesting about this. The first thing I noticed, and as you pointed out, is 0% have had their solution less than 6 months. Right. And we've talked a lot about this, that as part of the response to COVID, a lot of organizations, especially those organizations without deep cash flow, probably slowed down some of their investment areas. And so change was not something they were doing except where they had to, like embracing cloud. Right. So, and in fact, if you look at, say, the first two wedges over in the pie, you'd see, or actually, let's use the right-hand side. It's just easier for me to talk to. The 0 to 6 months, 0%, 7 to 12 months, 14%. Only 14% of respondents have had their solution less than a year. Right. For everybody else, they've had it at least one. And as Dave mentioned, we're at 80% in that 2-year range or more. So what we're seeing is there's a lot of established data protection, right? They're using what they're using. They're pretty committed. Well, I wouldn't say they're committed to it, but it is entrenched. And that's probably a key word for us to focus on a little bit, because over these next couple slides, you're going to see that entrench is precarious. And that's a lot of big fancy words. So maybe we should unpack that with what's coming next.
Yeah, and just before we leave this longevity slide, I remember when I was a Gartner analyst and we would get vendor references during the Magic Quadrant timeframe. And I would typically try to get as many as I could, but typically 20 or so references per vendor, and we'd follow up with them, oftentimes do a live interview. We do a survey as well. And what was amazing is a lot of people, now this is more of a upper mid-size to large enterprise statement, but the higher you go up the stack, more typically the longer the enterprise had their solution deployed. So for us to see 4 years or more in the SMB space, 1% or even just under 1%, we're rounding up to 1% in the Europe 200-person sample.
Right.
It's amazing because I think we mentioned it might have been last week, Jason, that you and I can remember a day when if someone said SMB backup, things like Backup Exec or ArcServe or Cheyenne before it was Computer Associates, that probably came to your mind, those two pretty quickly. And there might be some others as well, but I mean, it's not an exaggeration, I don't think, to say, 10, 15 years ago, it kind of was Coke and Pepsi, meaning a big number one and a big number two provider for a long time in the SMB backup market. And clearly we're a long way from that now.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, when I was at that VAR, I was a Seagate backup exec reseller before Symantec bought them, and then later, my first job when I left being a VAR was for Cheyenne ArcServe before CA bought them. So I actually got a chance to be with both of those mid-sized VAR-centric juggernauts very, very early in my career. Maybe that's why backup kind of got stuck along the way. And it's interesting that when you look at the partner ecosystem, and we'll look at more of that next week, you did used to find that partners would have, a backup solution. We're a backup exec shop, or we're an ArcServe shop, and that's what you sold. What we find, I think, and the reason enterprises typically have data protection for so much longer is you got 1,000 workloads that you're protecting. You don't want to rip out and replace that plumbing very often, right? You are change adverse even more than you are risk adverse. Now, mid-sized organization, a couple dozen servers, a couple hundred workstations, maybe 1 or 2 clouds. All of a sudden, it's like, you know what? If I'm not happy, I'm going to change. And so I think that's what you're seeing as far as that longevity goes. And the only thing that would get in the way of that fickleness, for lack of a better word, is a global pandemic that locked down everyone's budgets. So other than that, it's pretty fluid.
And, speaking of pandemic, we do have a question from Richard. Thank you very much, Richard, for posting your question. He says, with all the remote work going on, do you see customers changing their backup policies and approach to protect data in a lot of new places? I'll give an answer, and then I'll turn it over to you, Jason, as well. Short answer is yes, absolutely do. Now over a year, in some cases, maybe it's even 14 or so months for some of us into this current kind of situation, A lot of remote work, a lot of work from home for sure. And work from home, brought out in some interesting challenges. Like, do we have VPN set up or not? Am I using a laptop as an adult for work that I also end up sharing to homeschool my child who is
Sure.
also working remotely, working meaning attending school? So there were a lot of different implications of things. But I do see the massive deployment of VPN, encouraging people to drag content to shares on the corporate network, to use things like SharePoint or other kinds of collaboration tools. Certainly, Teams is something that we've seen usage of as well. And then from a retention perspective, I've seen some updates. But how about yourself? What have you seen, Jason?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two major pivots that remote work has had an effect on from a data protection perspective. Certainly, one of them is, remember, one of the core reasons that we've always done backup is in order to ensure productivity, right? And so that laptop device that for many of us have been our bread and butter for the last 16 months, that becomes a mission critical device to that employee because anything goes bad with that device, you're sitting on the couch. I mean, you got nothing that you can do for that day. And so certainly we're seeing a huge uptick in the interest around endpoint protection in order to be able to revert back to known good states. The other thing, and in fact, I was just listening to a webinar earlier this morning talking about one of the major areas of risk is as remote workers are first starting to come back into the workplace. Uh, Malware, ransomware, stuff that you clicked on 6 months ago. They don't want to ransomware your endpoint. They want you to walk that into the office. And once you're on a server, let's ransom that instead. And so IT folks have been really ramping up not only their proactive detection methodologies, but also their reactive. Let's make sure that we can recover because there's a greater chance than in the past that some well-intentioned laptop is going to walk in and infect us from the outside that they inherited while they were working on a dining room table. So yeah, absolutely, endpoint has changed over what remote workers should look like and the data protection posture that goes along with that.
Nice. And speaking of remote work, let's do hit the map because we do have, I mean, look, I think it's now about 8 different United States, 7 or 8 different countries worldwide. That includes, we've got Egypt, and here in the US, actually, let's hit that one. California, Colorado, Texas, wow, New York,
That works.
Pennsylvania. Yeah,
We don't get New York as often
we don't,
as I might hope. That's a nice change.
we don't. Ohio's in there. Globally, I know we've got Egypt, Pakistan, India,
You can
Angola.
always count on our friends from India dialing in. I don't remember the last time that India was not green for us. So thank you as always.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And you can see a little bit more of Europe starting to fill in there. Excellent. Well, let's hit our next slide. You hinted at it, Jason. All is not well in the state of SMB backup, meaning are you happy or not? And the short punchline is not necessarily that happy. If we hit the second slide, let's actually start with the right-hand side, and
Yep.
that says, what is your level of satisfaction with the tools your organization uses to protect its physical servers, NAS, and virtual machines?
Yeah.
Slight,
So
yeah, hit this. This is interesting to me. I mean, I like how you oftentimes take the converse, and if you take the converse, it's not a pretty picture.
yeah, I kind of think of it kind of like what's the phrase in the American judicial system? You are beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? You have to be guilty beyond a shadow of a doubt. The shadow of a doubt here is 68%. If you look on the right hand side, if 32% in both markets, from both a functional perspective, I'm happy with the features. And from a price value perspective, I'm okay with what I'm paying for it, right? Those are the two basic drivers. If 32% in both cases are completely satisfied, that means 68% of organizations see an opportunity to improve. That's how I look at that. Now, there for about half of organizations, 58% on functions, 52% on pricing. Is it a little bit of an uphill challenge? Yes, but in my mind, if you're not completely satisfied with your backup solution, you ought to be looking around, right? Because I promise you, there's better. For what fits you, there is better. So be looking for that 68. That 68% is looking for change.
Yeah, exactly. And then when we look at on the left-hand side, how are you actually acquiring that backup solution? Right in the middle, it's basically we purchased a traditional backup software hardware solution. US that was higher at 39% to compared to Europe at 27%. But look how high subscription is. And I think that's on the one hand, interesting, Jason, subscription being so high, given that we're a relatively young industry in terms of making that transition. Now, conversely, we're pretty far into a pandemic situation trying to contain costs, subscription model versus pay all up front, kind of understandable to see why that could be attractive.
Yeah, I totally buy in on SMBs being cloud based on their data protection solution. Remember, I mean, my opening story, right? So when I was a VAR, I was the IT department for a mid-sized organization. So what that meant though was they were paying me significant money per hour to supplement their expertise and to make sure their solution was pretty much lights out. You know what else you could pay for on a consumption basis and pretty much be lights out? Cloud-based backup, right?
Mm.
So I am completely on board with every mid-size organization. Really ought to be thinking cloud first for their data protection strategy. So I love the fact that nearly 50% of both the European and US mid-size markets are using that consumption-based approach. There's a couple other nuances on this data though that I think is super cool. And a little bit scary, a little bit scary. All right. So just under half of organizations leveraging a cloud-based solution. I like that a lot. If we're working down that left-hand side, the community edition, right? So mid-sized organizations don't typically need all the features, all the breadth, all the scale of a true enterprise solution, but they would like the trustworthiness, the reliability, right? The fact that it just works. It ought to be enterprise grade, should not necessarily be enterprise complex.
Right.
And I love that. That's what you're seeing in that second nugget is roughly, split the difference, 34% of organizations are using a community edition of what is a traditional backup product. Hey, Dave, do you know who makes a community edition of an enterprise class backup product that I think a lot of organizations are using?
Yeah, I do see. In fact, it's listed a couple times the name of that vendor on this current screen, the way it's framed out. And would, in all seriousness, encourage everyone head to the Veeam website. We have a whole section. I believe it's called Free Tools or Free Solutions. Just
Yep.
search free. That's pretty, straight ahead. But the interesting thing, I know we've mentioned it a few times, Jason, but the power, meaning the capability and also the number of machines or instances that no charge or free Veeam Community Edition can cover is actually pretty amazing. So if you are looking for a solution, or if you have a smaller environment and you just want to get started with something, really encourage you to go check that out. We actually even try to support that, meaning from a technical support perspective on a best can do basis. And you're free to post questions, comments on the forums. We actually use that as a way to better understand how can we update and refine our products.
Yeah,
But
and I just and the reason I just beat on this every time that we talk about community edition is let's go back that slide. Let's look in the lower left-hand corner. Typically in an industry insight session, Dave, I think you and I try as often as possible to really take a high altitude viewpoint. But I'm going to kind of break that rule for a second and tell folks looking on the bottom of the screen, 18%. So 1 out of 6 organizations in Europe, 24%, 1 out of 4 organizations in the US using the free backup product that came with their hardware and storage software. Can I just say, don't do that? I mean, when you buy backup software, when you buy a storage platform that comes with backup software, the goal is to drive consumption of the storage, right? It's not about ensuring you have a feature-rich, reliable backup solution. And there's probably exceptions to that rule. But again, what you bought was a disk solution, a storage solution, and this gives you another opportunity to fill up the disk and go buy another one. As long as you don't want to pay for your backup solution and you're basically looking for just that minimal feature set or minimal complexity, then go download the free community edition of Veeam, right? In fact, you can use that storage or that server that came with that free product, just put the backup product to the side. You can use all your existing investment, but if you want to be able to restore, don't do that. Don't be that guy. So anyway, that's I probably beat that one to a dead horse too, but
Well, probably not, because if you look at the percentage of 400 people and the way they're responding, there are real challenges out there. And that's consistent, by the way, not just with SMB research or this specific survey or the United States or Europe. Everywhere we see, from large enterprise, APJ, across the map, a lot of organizations are not happy, and for a variety of reasons, with the current backup solution. That really leads into, I guess I would almost call this next slide, Jason, the money slide. How likely are the mid-sized enterprise, the small and mid-sized business, likely to change their backup solution? And the short answer is they're pretty likely.
Yeah. So again, you're actually looking at the same question on both sides of the screen. On the left-hand side, you're looking at it cut by country. And so what you can see is actually Americans are much more likely than Europeans on that. We will definitely, right? Nearly a 3x bump on that. Everything else is kind of a curve that comes off of that. But in aggregate, using the numbers on the very bottom of your screen, 21 plus 42, 63%. So write this down, put it on a post note. 3 out of 5, 63%, 3 out of 5 organizations will either definitely or very likely change their backup solution over the next year. Now, that alone ought to get people focused, right? But what I think is even more interesting is look on the right-hand side. So same question, but we cut it based on what they said they were currently doing. So if you're only using on-prem tools at the top, if you're using on-prem and clouds, you're complementing probably in a hybrid architecture. That's in the middle. And then if you're only using cloud-based backup, you're on the bottom. Dave, take a look at the on-prem. Take a look at that top bar. 27%, 1 in 4 solutions are using all on-prem only solutions today. 27% definitely will change, 50% very likely to change, 20% somewhat likely. Add those up. What do we got? 70, 97%. I mean, it's stupid scary if you're a backup software company and you only sell on-premise products. That would keep me up at night. I'm glad not to be them. But yeah, so if you're using on-prem solutions, which by the way, all those free stuff that comes out of the storage box, that's all on-prem. But that's a huge likelihood to change. And it is interesting that it's predicated on some of that disk set is most likely based on the legacy and the lethargy of what they're using in on-prem tools today.
And the thing that really strikes me, Jason, is, this is it's like a temperature reading. This doesn't necessarily mean that these percentages will map out exactly like this. However, it is a reading on the sentiment, the level of SAT or DISSAT, as the case is here, those being surveyed. And the thing where I would double down on what you said, I would be concerned if you're currently satisfying this market as a vendor, is that now, hopefully, the economy is getting a little bit better. We're getting back to work in some kind of a hybrid-like fashion, meaning still work from home, but offices opening up, et cetera. If things continue to go better for the world, and we hope that it does, that means now you might have the economic ability to actually follow through with some of the dissatisfaction or pent-up challenges that you've been experiencing so that you can try to then go and make some improvements.
Yeah.
As we begin to wind down a little bit, let's hit this last slide because it actually directly relates to what you were saying.
Yeah, so basically what we have here is a 23-minute setup to a 2-minute punchline. So let's look at slide 4 and talk about, okay, we know there's change. We know there's dissat. We know that there's an interest in cloud and a high consumption of cloud already. When organizations were asked what's the likelihood that they're going to be using a cloud-based data protection solution over the next 2 years. So last question was over the next 12 months. This is stretching that a little bit further. Folks need to take a screenshot of this. So take a look at this for a second. So 38% on that big green in the upper right-hand corner, 38% said yes, we will almost certainly protect most or all of our servers with BAS or DRAS. That really big wedge, lower left, yes, will very likely protect at least some, right? So that can lean you into hybrid, but certainly every customer becomes a customer of a provider. 8% will potentially. There's only that tiny little green shim and or that red shim, and I had to stretch it to figure it out. It's 1%. 1% said no, it is unlikely. 1%, Dave.
Wow.
And my guess is even some of them are probably wrong.
Yeah, if it's 1%, that literally is a definition of rounding error. So the clearly interest, or at least current understanding and belief about what the antidote, the rescue could be for these problems that we've just highlighted is pretty clearly as a service provider, more increasingly cloud enabled. So I know we've got just a moment left. Let's hit the new countries that have come in, which
Yeah.
states and countries, like to be should be fair. States wise, we've got Michigan coming in, but also Saudi Arabia, Denmark, Netherlands, Russia, which always adds a good swath of green there. South
Nice.
Africa, which is quite common. Actually, we're very pleased to be able to rely on South African group to come in handy. Brazil, if I didn't mention them earlier, I was remiss. I should have.
No, Brazil and South Africa are new. I always look for them. They're two of my favorite places to go visit. So I look for them every week, and I'm happy whenever I see them. So
Outstanding. Well, as we begin to take it out here, Jason, maybe just a quick T. You mentioned it a little bit, but for the third and final section of our SMB data protection or backup readout next Monday, what are we going to double click on?
VARs and MSPs, right? So we're going to look at the role of the partner. And now we've talked about, cloud certainly has an interesting aspect in this. Cloud is your partner, right? And really, service providers ought to be thinking about expertise, not just about fulfillment. And so, looking at what is the role of the partner in 2021 in data protection for mid-sized orgs is a big deal for us. So that'll be part 3.
Excellent. And coming up this Friday, we've got a tee up for Veeam On. Speaking of things coming up, our big conference is going to be coming up later this month. But Rick Vanover, Melissa Palmer this Friday, same time as now, are going to tee up a little bit of a preview of what's coming in Veeam On. I'm just looking quickly. We're actually doing Veeam On globally in multiple different time zones. So depending on if you're, as you can see here, Americas and EMEA, May 25, 26, APJ 26 and 27. Also, definitely if you're an insomniac on the U.S. West Coast, feel free to join me at 3 a.m. Pacific or 4 a.m. my time, where we're going to be doing with Andrew Zalesko 91 different ways you can recover data with Veeam. A more reasonable North American-based 1 p.m. on the East Coast time, and then AZ is going to be taking that solo for an APJ third installment of that. So a lot of content coming your way. Jason, I think we should, though, do a double click. Encourage people to go check out the Veeam Community Edition.
Absolutely. For so many organizations, in fact, if you're an IT pro and you've got a little home server at home, because don't we all? Power that up. It is the same tech. It is the same reliable stuff that's protecting the largest enterprises in the world. Can protect your home machines and your kid's laptop before they get malware on it. So absolutely check that out. Full functioning product, just download it.
Awesome. Well, thank you as always for tuning in to episode 50. We look forward to seeing you on episode 51 in the future, 50 today. As always, stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next stream. Thank you.
Take care.